Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the second webinar of the SBOM Silver Bullet Executive Series. I'm Nancy Richardson, founder of VOC Company, very pleased to be your moderator for today's discussion, focused on hitting the target, the importance of collaboration. As with all of our SBOM seminars, these are going to be 30 minutes, very action-packed. It is listen only, and please, we encourage you to submit all of your questions through Q&A. We'll respond to those within about 5 business days, if not sooner. When it comes to SBOMs, there's no silver bullet to address all of their new requirements. This series has been curated to provide you with valuable insights and tips to help you on this journey. While our audience continues to log on, we'll introduce our today's guests. Please join me in welcoming our executive panel. All are recognized authorities by government and global markets for their medical device, cybersecurity, and regulatory expertise. Our first guest is Steve Abrahamson, who joins us from Ernst & Young, where he is managing director of their technology consulting cybersecurity practice. Leaders from medical technology, healthcare, and other industries rely on Steve for strategy, risk, and cybersecurity transformation. He brings extensive healthcare expertise from a variety of leadership positions held at GE and other global healthcare organizations. Steve has also served as vice chair of the MITA Cybersecurity Committee. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you.
Next, we have Elisabeth George, founder of Elisabeth George Consulting Group. She is an experienced transformational leader setting strategies across total product life cycles. She helps shape and lead global organizations in continuous improvement and innovative ways to utilize standards and regulations. Her ascending leadership roles at Philips evolved to global security for quality, regulatory, sustainability, and product security. Elisabeth has been recognized by several awards for her dedication to related initiatives, now serving on ANSY's board of directors. Welcome, Elisabeth.
Thank you.
Next, rounding out our guest panel is Ken Zalevsky. Ken is a certified cybersecurity leader, achieving certification in related disciplined degrees at Carnegie Mellon and Harvard universities, with nearly 20 years of experience in the medical device industry. He serves as a trusted cybersecurity consultant to national and international healthcare industry stakeholders, including the FDA and Department of Homeland Security. During his tenure at Bayer, Ken led medical device cybersecurity and is currently the founder and CEO of Vigilant Ops. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you so much. And just want to say it's a great pleasure to be here with such esteemed colleagues. Looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
It'll be fantastic. Respecting our 30 minutes together, I just have a few questions, and they're really addressing all of you. And we'll just kick off each of the questions, just rotating with each of you. So Steve, we'll start with you. Given your expertise and industry involvement, would each of you share some of your experiences regarding collaboration in competitive business environment and how such experiences have shaped your views?
Yeah, certainly, Nancy. And collaboration is extremely important in healthcare, cybersecurity. And I can think back to, I think it was 2015, sitting on a panel at an FDA workshop, I think I was sitting right next to Elisabeth, getting to know a lot of other manufacturers. So that really working in med device cybersecurity was my first opportunity to start working with people at other companies that were doing similar work with me. And we quickly realized that we had to work together to elevate the industry. And one thing that I learned before even getting involved in medical technology, before I was working at GE Healthcare making medical devices, I worked at GE Aircraft Engines making jet engines. And one thing that is true in the aviation industry is anything pertaining to safety is freely shared among all the competitors or all the organizations involved in that industry, because it's very well understood that if there's a public perception of a safety issue, it's not good for anybody. So information pertaining to safety is freely shared. And I realized when I started working in med device cybersecurity that same spirit had to carry through to cybersecurity in medical technology and healthcare, because it's really a safety issue, and if there's a perception or reality of any kind of a security or safety issue in healthcare, it's not good for anybody. So while everybody wants to be a leader, it's really important for everybody to work together to really elevate the industry.
Excellent. Having worked in both of those industries myself, I can completely understand and encourage it. I wish more verticals would do so, because it does really help and advantageous. We called it co-opetition, and I'm sure you've probably heard that before, right? So any other thoughts to add to Steve's?
Yeah, Nancy, thanks for teeing up this question. And Steve, great memory. I forgot about that time we sat next to each other. And you're right. I think as competitors and as colleagues, it is important that we collaborate. One of the things as a regulatory professional, it's always been important for me to understand all of the different requirements. And those requirements are very broad in the medical device area. And ironically enough, I too used to work in the aerospace industry as well. So there's a lot of commonality there. But one of the things I had to do was I didn't even know what cybersecurity was. I thought about it. To me, it was always just the passwords logging onto my computer. And so one of the things I had to learn, and I had to collaborate, obviously, with my cybersecurity colleagues, is help them help me learn what it is and how to work together on that, because it's just so important that we try to optimize how we implement the requirements, how we understand those requirements. And it's not something that you can just keep adding on top of each other. It's got to be something that we work closely together. And as Steve mentioned at that event that we had, it was a great opportunity, not just to sit next to on one side of me to have my cybersecurity, product security lead from Philips, but to have, GE, Siemens, and then also we had many of the hospitals people there as well working with us. So, those were really some of the ways that I started, and it was, I guess, about 8 years ago, started to learn all of the terminology, all of the requirements, all of the expectations. And so thank you to Ken and Steve for helping educate me in this area.
Well, we were probably only a few years ahead. I know I got into cybersecurity by accident in 2010, so I think I was just a few years ahead of you, Elisabeth.
Yeah, I'll have to echo those sentiments. I mean, kind of stumbled into it accidentally. I mean, remember the days when it was all about privacy, right? The HIPAA laws and PHI were the talk of the town, and security kind of wormed its way in, so to speak. We kind of all, I think, were taken a little bit by surprise when folks started to realize, hey, these are computers that we're deploying on networks with potential vulnerabilities and ways to break in, and they're vulnerable, right? So we had to start thinking about security and kind of put on a different hat, switch from privacy to security pretty quickly. And I feel a little left out. I wasn't in the aerospace industry, so I've always been in med tech. But honestly, it's evolving continuously, right? I mean, I think back to 2018 and being at FDA, talking about the pre-market guidance and talking about security and implementation of that, right? And kind of fast forwarding to today with the Appropriations Act and all the new things that are happening. And, I think we're all moving in a good direction, and it continues to evolve. And, to Elisabeth's point, I'm still learning, we're all, I think, still learning how to best adopt in this kind of newer connected digital world, right? I think there's going to be, like, I don't know, the last time I saw Internet of Medical Things, 5 billion connected medical devices in 5 years or something crazy like that. I mean, that number's always going up, but that's, that's where it's heading. And that's where the nature of the beast today. We all have to be concerned about security, and it is a collaborative effort across organizations externally and, internally.
Internally, yes, definitely. Also find internally and externally the power of collaboration. Also, you get all the minds together and you can be a force that impacts the industry. I mean, there's regulations and all these groups out there, but until you really have these forces of the collective co-opetition force, it's powerful, and you can impact it so much more rather than siloed. Great answers. Next question, Elisabeth, we'll start with you. There's a broad impact of cybersecurity let me start that again. There's a broad impact of cybersecurity on manufacturers. Which organization functions should be included when developing a cybersecurity strategy, and why?
Well, I think, a real simple answer is everybody. All the functions need to be there. I think one of the challenges that we have with regulations, with cybersecurity, with any requirement that comes out is everybody immediately says, oh, it's a cybersecurity requirement. Let's toss that over to product security and they'll just make it happen. And magically it'll be integrated into the product. Well, anybody with half a brain should know that's kind of a stupid statement to make, because if you don't have your business leaders aligned, then it's not going to be a priority and you're not going to have the right resources. If you don't have it integrated into the quality system, people are going to say, well, I don't have to do that. That's just a nice to have. If you don't have your supply chain organization embracing it, they're going to build the product and maybe they're going to actually implement in a vulnerability while they're manufacturing it. If you don't have supplier management involved, you're going to possibly purchase bad software or bad computers that have software loaded into them. So, back to that first statement, it really is everybody has to be involved. And it's really important that it be done as a good business practice. Don't do it because the quality system mandates it. Do it because it makes sense. You want to have it part of the standard way of working. And then when you do design the product, you want to make sure that it's the best practices have been defined, that it makes sense how you're doing it, and that, like I said at the early answer, that it's not something that's an add-on. You can't do it as an add-on, because if it's an add-on, it's definitely not going to work. And I see both Steve and Ken nodding their heads, so I'm sure that they can add on to what I've just said, because we don't want add-ons, but we want to work collaboratively in our answers even.
Well, just to add to your point before we go on to the rest of the panel, the often overlooked group, which actually is the face of the manufacturer, are marketing and sales, right? Marketing and sales has to be brief. They have to understand, they have to be, and plus they hear the voice of the customer, the VOC, right? Mm-hmm. So that has to be part of the collaboration as well. And often enough, that's shoved to the end, when involving them in the original part could actually uncover, opportunities to make an even better outcome. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. And what Elisabeth said is true. And even at a more basic level, at first glance, many security issues are assumed to be engineering problems. Like if you have smart engineers, the engineers will just figure out how to do it, just tell them to make the product secure. But it's really much more complicated than that. And what I always found fascinating working in cybersecurity in medtech was it did involve every function in the business. And if you go back to the early days, it didn't really get too much into the supply chain, but now it has. So that was the one org that, at least for me, initially going back 13, 14 years ago, was excluded, but now they're firmly in the mix. And yeah, there's certain elements that require engineering solutions. So there's aspects of it being an engineering issue. Certain elements are quality and regulatory. Certain elements are commercial. You have to create that correct interaction with the commercial side. And then parts of it are marketing, service, et cetera. And one of the big challenges is getting marketing and product management involved, because you're essentially creating a different stream of user requirements where they're very in tune with getting the clinical requirements from the doctors and the clinicians. And they're typically not asking for security features. They don't ask for more complex passwords or that sort of thing. So you really have to help establish another stream of user requirements that are security related, coming from another realm of the customer body. Their information security and clinical engineering people that are starting to look at securing their networks and their operations. So it really requires a broad view of how it impacts all the different stakeholders. And it covers just about everybody. I even had interactions with HR that was usually because I was in trouble for something, but that they even got involved in security in my career.
Yeah,
Any
that's
thoughts, Ken? Yep.
yeah, no, thank you, Steve. That was great. I think you said it very well. I mean, so all parts of the organization really kind of need to get behind the effort, and it's being kind of in a way, if you look at it analogous to the safety issues, right? I mean, it's kind of like the part and parcel of doing business, right? Nowadays, security just needs to be bundled in. We need to think about that, as Elisabeth pointed out, as we're developing products, not a bolt on at the end. So I think the natural inclination and the reason why a lot of these problems get tossed to engineering is because they end up there eventually, right? So at some point, somebody's got to patch the product, fix the product, make it more secure. So everybody kind of just assumes that goes straight to engineering. But to Steve and Elisabeth's point, on the front end of this picture are the customers, so folks that we're dealing with that are now asking questions, to Steve's point about security, and they're saying, okay, what about these vulnerabilities you've got? And so informing those functions as you're moving through this is very helpful, and kind of that communication that needs to happen with customers, with regulatory authorities, all that's very, very important. And so pulling those groups in early is, of course, better.
And I'd like to add on to that a little bit. I think that, Ken, you definitely talked about our customers. And I think, we need to remember that we have our internal customers that are, as we move things throughout the process. But the two critical external, you touched on most definitely the end user customers, which are severely critical, but we also have the FDA and regulators around the world. And I think that one of the things that is good and bad, and here's a regulatory person saying that is that, the regulators are starting to get it. They're realizing that cybersecurity is key. I wish they'd align a little bit more on what their requirements and their way of embracing regulatory compliance in cybersecurity. But, I think that we see each of our regulators asking the right questions now. At the FDA, obviously, as you mentioned, Ken, earlier, the pre-market and the post-market activities, which the good news, I think, for many of the cyber experts is that as companies, they've been doing a lot of these things. Now we just have to prove it. And I guess, Steve, in a lot of your work, you're probably having people ask a lot of those questions pretty often as well. And I'd be curious to hear from you what you're hearing on that.
Yeah, definitely. There's obviously a lot of interest in the growth of regulatory authority and influence in the realm of cybersecurity, particularly in med tech, and anticipating what it's going to be in the future. So we can extrapolate what's been happening in the last 5, 6, 7 years into the future and see that it is going to become much more prescriptive. But I think I'm sure Elisabeth and Ken would both agree with me on this. Even though if you look at what the regulators, FDA and global regulators, are doing, you may not always agree with it and the implementation methods, but they are making a very strong effort to be collaborative with industry, to get into industry inputs and give everybody a voice. So I think it's an aspect that is pretty collaborative, and that's also a challenge and another need for collaboration within the industry, because every med device manufacturer pretty much has had a bad experience with regulators. And when you have cybersecurity people acting in a collaborative fashion with the regulators that are working in the cybersecurity realm, it is sort of surprising and unexpected by the RA people. It makes them a little bit nervous that there's somebody outside of their tightly controlled communication mechanisms talking with and working with regulators. It just makes them a little bit nervous, and you have to create that understanding that this is a little bit different path than enforcing the med device regulation via audits and findings and 483s and that sort of thing.
Yeah, they're not just playing overseer. I mean, actually, Suzanne on our last webinar from FDA Medical Device reinforced to people, we're here to help. Reach out and ask questions. We want to work together with you to help you meet this objective. And I thought that was that just, you just double down on that to reinforce, that action. And on another note, you look at RFPs today from prospective purchasers and so forth, and they're looking for cybersecurity. What is your cybersecurity strategy? Okay, as a medical device manufacturer, what, they're actually scrutinizing right up front and saying, what is it? What is your competitive edge? And if you're not prepared, you could lose deals or miss opportunities and not even realize, what they're looking for. Any other closing thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, actually, Ken and Steve, I was involved a little bit in this, but I seem to recall when we had the WannaCry issue, you may remember that Suzanne and her team had multiple times daily calls of collaboration and coordination. And she, I remember some of the first calls, there was crickets from industry. Nobody felt comfortable in talking. And I'd love to hear some of your perspectives on that, because I know eventually a few of us that I was one of the few regulatory people that was on that call. And so I remember starting the conversation, and all of a sudden all the cyber guys all started jumping in, like, oh, it is okay to point out the emperor wears no clothes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think WannaCry, which was May 12th, 2017, so almost 6 years ago now. I remember the date very well, as you all probably do. That was really the tipping point in creating a much more collaborative, open communication approach in industry. Because when WannaCry hit, I would say the major manufacturers that I had visibility to, I had very good visibility to one in particular. There was a reluctance to share any information because it was perceived as a type of defect. And there's various reasons why you don't want to put out information that, hey, we may have some products out there that are defective, but it's not really the same thing. And you can mitigate the impact of the vulnerability by sharing information and by being transparent. And it took a while. And I think cybersecurity people knew that, grasped it immediately, but there's other pressures for other business reasons to not be quite so open. So while the cybersecurity people among the manufacturers were open to sharing information, the businesses themselves at a higher level were not initially. But I think by the end of WannaCry, or I shouldn't say by the end of it, by a few weeks into it, then the information started to flow a little bit more freely. And now I think it's just accepted that they're going to be doing a much higher level of disclosure. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that was really the tipping point where it made companies that hadn't really thought about it enough before to really know how to deal with it, to figure out how to deal with it.
Yeah, and I have to echo that sentiment. And I was laughing, Steve, when you said that, because I remember the date is etched in my mind as well, the WannaCry date. And I think you're right. It was kind of a pivotal moment in medtech for us to realize cybersecurity is something we all need to pay attention to, and the collaborative effort there around fixing and getting out and communicating to customers what the problems are, and being more transparent and open was kind of the first time I saw a lot of that sea change as WannaCry kind of went forward. And what I don't want to see happen, and I'm sure none of us do, is I don't want it to be necessary for another WannaCry to happen before we kind of continue or take this more seriously, or get into this a little more this collaborative effort and this sharing of information. And I think we're all, we said this before, we're all heading in the right direction. I think Elisabeth pointed out regulatory is, and even Nancy said that regulatory is open and willing to deal with folks in a more collaborative way. We hear shared responsibility all the time, and I think we kind of need to step up and say, look, we're not going to wait for another WannaCry. We're going to get proactive. We're going to be communicative with customers. We're going to be monitoring our devices. We're going to bake safety and security in up front in the design and development. All those great things, I think, were precipitated from this kind of push that we had, right from that incident. So while the date is burned in my mind as one that was difficult, and we had a lot of trying times from that, I think it actually turned us in a good direction, honestly.
Yeah, it's another great example of how collaboration actually worked to resolve. We've spoken a lot of both internal and external collaboration, and now moving on to the fun part, right? And I'll address, this is to you first, Elisabeth. With the numerous cybersecurity guidance documents, regulations, and legislation, how do you know where to start? It sounds so overwhelming. What do you recommend?
Well, it is overwhelming. And, as a good regulatory person, what's the first thing I'm going to say? It depends, because, and it does depend. There's a lot of driving forces that help you decide. Sometimes your customers may actually have a specific standard or regulation or requirement listed in their contract with you. Your regulator in a particular geography may have specific requirements. There is a risk methodology, like with any requirements, particularly in medical devices. We think about where we are with the risk profile. So we want to make sure that we've addressed the risks. We also have to take into consideration, what vendors and suppliers we're utilizing, because they already have some elements of cyber controls or cyber oversight or mechanisms in place. So a little bit of it is a juggling act. You have to sit there and balance all of these things together. And most importantly, whatever decisions you make, justify your reasons why you've chosen what you've chosen. Because in most cases, if there is an issue later, or if the regulator asks, if you have a good rationale as to why you chose what you chose, the worst case scenario is going to be, yes, maybe you're going to have to do a recall or a fix, but it's not going to be the heavy burden and the heavy stick. It's going to be in a collaborative manner to take action and fix it. I think Ken and Steve are going to know the specific regs and standards and all of that associated with this. I'm always a good partner in that, but they know also how to make some of those decisions. And I also want to hear their inputs as to how they, when they're developing products, make those decisions.
That's actually a good tee up for the next webinar too, as we, the FDA will actually be our additional special guests, and as they discuss the recently released IMDRF global regulations and documents and so forth. Okay, we have about just a minute or two. Any either of you, Ken or Steve, have something to add?
Yeah, I'll just quickly add that the key thing is for manufacturer to be organized, because product security is a very specialized area. You have to have that identified as a specialized program with mechanisms to ingest those different types of requirements and roll those out to the product organizations as needed. A mantra I've always followed is you don't want individual product organizations or engineers or anybody to have to be interpreting all these regulations and follow them. You want them to be following internal documentation, and you want some centralized unit to be interpreting all the external stuff and translating that into your internal processes. And if you make a mistake along the way, like Elisabeth said, as long as you've done your due diligence, you have a process, you have continual improvement baked into it, that's very defensible. And everybody realizes that perhaps not everything is going to be 100% right, but you've got a good process in place.
Great. Ken, any other thoughts?
In the last minute, no, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think they're both right on the money, Elisabeth and Steve. Thank you. Fantastic answer. And I agree with you. To Elisabeth's point, it depends. And to Steve's point, think about process, think about procedure, and think about security as you think about safety, and bake that in early and early and often, let's say.
Right. That goes into our key points as we close here. We have some key takeaways just based on everything we've discussed and even others, that like the SBOM and cybersecurity requirements have a broad reaching impact. Security, R&D, quality and regulatory and supply chain, sales and marketing, service and customers, and how important, collaboration is critical to your success internally and externally. Just a reminder here, for webinar 3, we'll be announcing the date shortly on Twitter, as well as LinkedIn, Vigilant Ops, as well as VOC company profiles. So please do follow. that we'll be discussing FDA, FDA will be our special guest, and we'll be discussing the recent released IMDRF, global regulations and everything that goes with it. Thank you all for joining us today and helping us put this together. I mean, this has all been a collaborative effort, and we have several more ahead working with all of you. So thank you very much for your contributions and preparation and for your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. It was
Thank you.
great.
Bye.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye.